everyone. You know that I hope that that brother made it home safely. I hope that he now has a different perspective.
50 Cent has been having a fucking ball.
I don't want a big house no more.
Because it's so long?
I don't care what's going on down there. I don't want to go over there, huh?
Love to share game with the young hustlers. I'm a boss, keeping it true to the culture. If I wanted to sell 250 the first week, you think Rose couldn't have played that game?
I got some music that I'm working on.
You do?
I did something currently, me, Eminem, and Tupac. It's coming out shortly.
Hey, boy, Pac been dead 30 years. Let the man rest in peace. Man, Eminem, come on now. Come on, Curtis. Put them shoes out, let them flop, and do your Tony Yayo Lloyd Banks remix, baby. Come on, baby, let's go.
Man.
I want to go viral this morning, so Curtis, I ain't finished with you. I saw you making excuses of why you was kicked off the shows, blamed it on the black woman. She's the creator, she wrote it. It's her show. Ghost was her show. Kanan was her show. She gave you $3,500 an episode. Just to do little posts and all that. Be loyal to the black woman the way you are to Eminem. She gave you an opportunity.
I did something currently, me, Eminem, and Tupac. Yeah.
What? How? I mean, we're confused about the Tupac of it. Only just,
What are
you doing? AI?
It's his estate. We got, no, it's not AI. It's actually.
It's some of the stuff that hasn't been released.
His music?
And they gave you the green light.
What? That just broke some news.
Yeah, and they gave you the green light to use it?
Yeah. They delivered it. It actually was for the theme for the fight, Street Fighter.
Yeah.
The movie.
Yeah.
So, and then we worked on it and got it right, so.
So when does that drop?
Soon. It'll be coming out shortly.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
That's big.
Hey, so I got somebody in the DM. Y'all talking shit. It's y'all. Y'all want to bet, Rose? We want to bet, but I ain't got no cash up, but I want to bet you. Okay, so now me being a boss, I got to come up with something.
On top of that, Ricky goes out to troll 50 Cent, being that 50 said that he has new music dropping with Eminem, and also continues to troll him, basically saying that them G-Unit sneakers that 50's gonna drop are gonna flop.
But I heard you say you finna release new music with Eminem and Tupac. Hey, boy, Pac been dead 30 years. Let the man rest in peace. Man, Eminem, come on now. Come on, Curtis. Put them shoes out, let them flop, and do your Tony Yayo Lloyd Banks remix, baby. Come on, baby, let's go. Those G-Unit sneakers gonna be in Costco, baby. I like the Lloyd Banks ones better than all the other ones. Them other ain't even got no sneakers, but 50, give Lloyd Banks his own high top sneaker. And since the street ain't happening no more, you know what I'm saying? You can focus on the sneakers.
By chart data, Rick Ross's Set in Stone debuted at number 39 on this week's Billboard 200, selling 19,000 copies. 19,000 copies. Is it me? Is that 19,000 for Rick Ross a flop?
50, who own your masters? Who own your masters? I buy your masters. You better shut up. I will buy your masters.
You know what I'm saying? That's what that is. Like after Canada, Rick Ross got fucked.
So they're just arguing, two rich guys arguing about nonsense.
Mahogany caskets, that's on fire. That's me and Tip. Me and my dog, motherfucking Lucci, just dropped Ring Around the Rose. It's on fire. Y'all know I'm shooting videos to everything. Rose rich, and it's a plus. The catalog shooting up. The catalog, I still own my catalog as of today. I bought a mansion on Miami Star Island. It's worth 97 plus million. And it's a beautiful dream home, the most exclusive island in South Florida, and also an incredible investment. I'm 50 million in. I purchased it for 35 million. I put another 15 or 20 in it. It's worth 97 plus million right now. Real estate is an amazing situation.
What happens when a long-running rap feud suddenly turns into a question about a $100 million mansion? Rick Ross has spent years building an image around luxury, business, and the kind of success that looks impossible to ignore. But after Ross showcased a massive property and used his wealth to make a point, 50 Cent saw an opening, and he went straight for it. 50 allegedly claimed that the same property Ross was presenting as a major symbol of success could be found as a rental listing on Airbnb. That claim immediately changed the conversation. Suddenly, fans weren't just debating album numbers anymore. They were asking who actually owns the property, what it's really worth, and whether the alleged listing has anything to do with Ross at all. But here's where things get interesting. The Airbnb claim has not been publicly confirmed by Ross or Airbnb. So is 50 exposing something serious? Or is this simply another savage chapter in their decades-long rivalry? And when Ross finally responds, the argument could get even bigger. The latest chapter of the 50 Cent and Rick Ross rivalry didn't begin with a diss track. It began with a number so big that it immediately grabbed attention: $100 million. Rick Ross has built his public image around exactly this kind of flex. Massive properties, expensive cars, private aviation, business ventures, and a lifestyle that constantly tells fans one thing: the music may change, but the money keeps moving. So when Ross highlighted a property he described as being worth around $100 million, the message wasn't difficult to understand. He was showing that his definition of success goes far beyond what happens on a Billboard chart. But 50 Cent wasn't interested in giving him that victory. Instead, 50 turned the conversation in a completely different direction. Rather than debating Ross about longevity or arguing over who had the better career, he focused on the mansion itself. According to the claim repeated in the controversy, 50 suggested that the property Ross was presenting as a major symbol of wealth could allegedly be found as an Airbnb rental. And just like that, the entire conversation changed. Because if that claim were true, fans naturally had questions. Was the property actually owned by Ross? Was it being rented for business purposes? Was Ross simply using the location for a video or event? Or was social media once again taking one dramatic claim and turning it into something much bigger? Those questions matter because a luxury property appearing on a rental platform does not automatically prove anything about someone's finances. Wealthy people rent expensive properties all the time. A mansion can generate income through vacations, private events, productions, photo shoots, or other business arrangements. So even if a listing existed, that alone wouldn't prove that Ross was struggling or that his wealth was fake. And that's where this story gets much more complicated. The mansion controversy came at a moment when 50 Cent was already attacking Ross over his new album, Set in Stone. The project had become another opportunity for 50 to question whether Ross's larger-than-life image was matching his current commercial performance. Reports discussed in the original controversy placed the album's first-week performance far below some of Ross's earlier releases. That gave 50 exactly what he loves, a number that can be turned into a punchline. For Ross, however, the argument was never simply about 1 week's sales. His response was essentially that a career shouldn't be measured by one chart position. After spending decades in the industry, Ross could point toward music, real estate, businesses, branding, and longevity as evidence that his success wasn't dependent on one album's opening week. That created two completely different definitions of winning. 50 Cent was looking at the latest scoreboard. Rick Ross was looking at the entire career. And that's why the mansion became so important. Ross wasn't just talking about a house. He was using the property as part of a larger argument about wealth. His message was that while people might obsess over album numbers, he had spent years building assets that could continue producing value outside music. 50 saw that as an opportunity. If Ross wanted to make real estate part of the conversation, 50 could attack the real estate. That's exactly how their rivalry has always worked. One side makes a claim, and the other side searches for the weakest point in it. The argument rarely stays in one lane. Music becomes money. Money becomes business. Business becomes property. Property becomes lifestyle. Then suddenly an argument that started over an album is being debated across social media as a question of who is actually winning at life. But there's another detail that makes the Airbnb allegation especially important. The claim itself needs to be separated from what has actually been established. The supplied reporting does not provide public confirmation from Rick Ross or Airbnb that the property was connected to Ross through an Airbnb listing. That means the claim should not be treated as proven fact. It is a statement attributed to 50 Cent and repeated as part of the feud. That distinction could completely change how people view the controversy. Because imagine two different scenarios. In the first scenario, 50 found a legitimate rental listing connected to the property and used it to expose something Ross hadn't explained publicly. That would give the story a very different edge. But in the second scenario, the property was simply available for rental for normal business reasons, or the listing had no direct connection to Ross whatsoever. In that case, the allegation becomes much less damaging. And there's an even bigger question. Who actually owns the property? That question is almost impossible to ignore once the Airbnb allegation enters the conversation. A celebrity appearing inside an expensive mansion doesn't automatically mean they personally own the entire property. Celebrities rent locations, attend events, shoot content, and use properties for business purposes all the time. So the real issue isn't simply whether someone found a luxury mansion on a rental platform. The real issue is whether that specific property can be directly connected to Rick Ross in the way 50 Cent implied. Until that connection is independently established, viewers should treat the Airbnb angle carefully. But 50 Cent wasn't finished, because the mansion was only one piece of a much bigger attack. He had already been questioning Ross's album performance and making jokes about the numbers. Ross had responded by emphasizing longevity and his ability to build outside of music. That made the feud less about who had the better song and more about whose version of success was more convincing. And this is where 50 had another opening. If Ross wanted to point toward businesses and assets, 50 could point toward his own business history. 50 has spent years presenting himself not just as a rapper, but as an entrepreneur and entertainment businessman. So when Ross challenged 50 over his own projects, including the proposed development connected to Shreveport, Louisiana, the feud immediately gained another layer. Ross questioned 50's plans and mocked aspects of the project. But once again, the argument wasn't necessarily about what had already been built. Some of what circulated online involved renderings and concept images, which represent proposed ideas rather than finished developments. Still, that didn't stop the jokes. Ross used the opportunity to turn the spotlight back onto 50, essentially saying that if 50 wanted to question Ross's empire, then Ross could question 50's own plans. And that's what makes this rivalry so difficult to predict. Neither man wants to stay on the original subject. 50 talks about Ross's album. Ross talks about 50's businesses. 50 talks about the mansion. Ross talks about Shreveport. Then the conversation suddenly moves to sneakers, private jets, old business disputes, and everything else these two have accumulated over years of public tension. But beneath all those jokes is one serious question. What actually counts as success? Is it the first week album number? Is it the size of your real estate portfolio? Is it how much money your businesses generate? Is it how long you've remained relevant? Or is it simply the ability to keep your name in the conversation after decades in the spotlight? That's the question neither side can completely avoid. And the mansion controversy has now become another test of that argument. Because if Ross is using the property to demonstrate financial strength, then any question surrounding that property automatically becomes part of the larger debate about his image. At the same time, 50's accusation doesn't automatically make it true. That's the line viewers have to keep in mind. A savage Instagram post can create a headline in seconds. Proving the underlying claim is a completely different matter. And so far, that's where this story remains. A massive mansion, a controversial Airbnb allegation, two longtime rivals with completely different definitions of success, and an audience watching closely to see which man can control the narrative. But there was one thing Ross could do that would immediately shift the pressure back on a 50 Cent. And when he started talking about 50's own business moves, the feud suddenly became much bigger than a mansion. Rick Ross wasn't about to let 50 Cent control the entire story. Because while 50 was focused on album numbers and the alleged Airbnb situation, Ross had another argument ready: longevity. For Ross, the conversation wasn't supposed to be about 1 week on a chart. He had spent years building a career that survived multiple eras of hip-hop. He could point to major albums, business ventures, real estate, branding, and the fact that his name had remained relevant long after many artists from his generation disappeared from the spotlight. That was the foundation of his response. Ross essentially challenged the idea that a rapper's current sales number should erase everything that came before it. And there is a certain logic to that argument. An artist can have a weak album and still be financially successful. A disappointing first week doesn't automatically erase years of touring, catalog revenue, business investments, endorsements, or property ownership. But 50 Cent wasn't looking at the situation that way. For 50, numbers were another weapon. He repeatedly questioned why artists who claim enormous streaming audiences sometimes struggle to turn that attention into successful businesses outside music. His argument was that if an artist really has an enormous audience, that audience should theoretically create opportunities beyond streams. Clothing, sneakers, food and beverages, other businesses, anything that can turn attention into actual revenue. That argument was aimed at more than just Ross. It reflected 50's broader approach to celebrity business. He has spent years presenting himself as someone who understands how to turn entertainment attention into different kinds of income. So when Ross started talking about his own wealth and assets, 50 had no reason to stay focused on music. He could challenge the entire image. And that's exactly what made the mansion allegation so effective as a social media storyline. It wasn't necessarily about whether Ross could afford a mansion. It was about perception. Ross has deliberately built the persona of the larger-than-life boss. His videos frequently feature luxury properties, expensive vehicles, jewelry, private aviation, and extravagant surroundings. That image is part of the product. So if a rival can make people question even one part of that image, the conversation becomes much bigger than the original accusation. Suddenly people aren't asking how many albums Ross sold. They're asking whether the mansion is really his. They're asking whether it's actually worth $100 million. They're asking whether it's a rental. They're asking who owns it. And they're asking whether Ross's public lifestyle is exactly what it appears to be. But there's a major problem with turning those questions into conclusions. Questions aren't evidence. That's especially important with the Airbnb angle. Even if an expensive property is available for rent, that doesn't automatically mean the person associated with it doesn't own it. In fact, renting an expensive property can be a business strategy. A property that sits empty produces nothing. A property that can be rented for events, vacations, productions, or other purposes can potentially generate income. So ironically, if Ross actually had a connection to a rental property, that could potentially support his long-term business argument rather than destroy it. That's why the details matter. The online version of the story is simple. Ross says $100 million. 50 says Airbnb. Internet goes crazy. But the real-world version is much more complicated. Who listed the property? Who owns it? Was Ross renting it? Was he filming there? Was it connected to one of his companies? Was the listing even active at the time the claim was made? Those are the questions that would need answers before anyone could call the allegation a confirmed exposure. And the supplied reporting doesn't establish those answers. That hasn't stopped the internet from debating it, though, because this is exactly the type of controversy social media loves. It requires almost no explanation. You put a huge mansion on one side of the screen and an alleged rental listing on the other, and people immediately understand the conflict. That's how a complicated business question becomes a viral argument. And 50 Cent understands that better than almost anybody. His social media strategy has often been less about making a traditional argument and more about creating a moment. A screenshot, a short caption, a sarcastic comment, a photograph. Then the audience does the rest. That's what makes his trolling effective. He doesn't need everyone to agree with him. He only needs people to start talking. And with Rick Ross, that strategy has an especially long history. Their feud has been going on for years, so every new attack comes with old context attached. A joke about an album reminds people of an old disagreement. A comment about money brings up previous business arguments. A mansion post brings back every previous debate about wealth and lifestyle. And before long, people aren't even discussing the original issue anymore. They're discussing the entire history between the two men. That's exactly what happened here. The album Set in Stone became the first major pressure point. Reports discuss the project as having a much weaker opening than Ross's biggest previous releases. The script supplied reporting also notes that different reports gave different chart positions, so those figures should be handled carefully. But regardless of the exact position, the broader point remained the same. The album wasn't performing at the level many people associated with Rick Ross's biggest commercial moments. That gave 50 ammunition. Ross responded by emphasizing that music is only one part of the equation. And that's where the debate becomes interesting, because 50 and Ross aren't necessarily playing the same game anymore. Both men started as rappers. Both built recognizable brands. Both expanded beyond music. Both have accumulated businesses and investments. But their public definitions of success are different. 50 often highlights numbers, ownership, deals, and business wins. Ross highlights longevity, lifestyle, properties, and the ability to remain relevant. So when one man says, "Look at the numbers," the other can answer, "Look at everything I've built." Neither statement completely destroys the other. A rapper can have weak album sales and still be wealthy. A rapper can have a huge catalog and still release a disappointing project. A celebrity can own expensive property and still rent other properties. A wealthy person can fly private and still take a commercial flight. And that's another point that became part of the online conversation. Ross was reportedly seen traveling commercially, which some people immediately treated as evidence that something had changed financially. But that conclusion doesn't necessarily follow. Private aviation is incredibly expensive. Fuel, maintenance, pilots, storage, landing fees, scheduling, and other costs can make commercial travel more practical depending on the situation. Someone choosing a commercial flight doesn't automatically mean they lost access to private aviation. It can simply mean they made a practical decision. That same principle applies to the mansion. Luxury doesn't always mean constant personal use. A valuable asset can be used strategically. That's a lesson that gets lost in celebrity culture because social media rewards appearances rather than financial logic. People see a private jet and assume someone must fly private everywhere. They see a mansion and assume the owner must live there every day. They see a luxury car and assume the person bought it outright. Reality is usually more complicated. And that's exactly why the Ross and 50 feud is so entertaining. They take those complicated realities and turn them into simple public arguments. 50 takes Ross's luxury image and asks whether every part of it can withstand scrutiny. Ross takes 50's business projects and asks whether every one of those plans actually delivers results. Then both sides have an audience ready to amplify the next shot. The Shreveport dispute became another example. Ross mocked aspects of 50's proposed film and television studio plans, including the concept images associated with the project. But a rendering is not a finished building. It's a visual representation of what a development could look like. So once again, the online argument became bigger than the evidence. Ross used the images to question 50's plans. 50 could use Ross's mansion to question Ross's image. Both sides were effectively attacking the other man's future or presentation rather than simply discussing what already existed. And then the feud moved into business. Ross questioned 50's relationship with Shreveport and made accusations involving money and the city's willingness to support the project. Those statements should be treated as Ross's claims and trolling rather than established financial facts. But from a content perspective, the effect was obvious. The battlefield kept expanding. Music wasn't enough anymore. Now they were fighting over real estate, then business, then sneakers, then travel, then old career decisions. And that's when you realize the mansion story isn't really just about a mansion. It's about credibility. 50 wants viewers to question Ross's presentation of wealth. Ross wants viewers to question whether 50's own business claims are as strong as he says. Each man is trying to force the audience to look behind the image. And that is exactly why the alleged Airbnb listing became such a powerful talking point. It created a simple challenge to Ross's entire luxury persona. But there is still one major piece missing. Even if the property was genuinely available for rent, what does that actually prove? Does it prove Ross doesn't own it? No. Does it prove Ross is broke? No. Does it prove the $100 million valuation is false? Not by itself. And does it prove 50 Cent's version of the story? Again, no. That's where viewers have to separate entertainment from verification. 50 may have found something interesting. He may have found a completely unrelated listing. Or there may be a legitimate business explanation that makes the entire accusation far less dramatic. Until the underlying details are established, the strongest conclusion isn't that one man exposed the other. The strongest conclusion is that 50 found a way to turn one questionable detail into another massive round of their rivalry. And Ross knows exactly how to play that game too. Instead of letting the mansion dominate the conversation, he can redirect attention toward 50's own empire. Because if you're going to question another man's house, another man's album, and another man's business decisions, eventually the spotlight comes back to you. And when that spotlight turned toward 50 Cent, Ross had plenty to say. The next stage of this feud wasn't going to be about a house anymore. It was going to be about who really has the stronger empire. And that's where things got even more personal. At this point, the mansion controversy had become much bigger than the original argument. What started with Rick Ross talking about his wealth and 50 Cent attacking his recent numbers had turned into a battle over credibility, business, and image. And that is where this feud becomes especially interesting. Because both men have something to prove. Rick Ross wants people to believe that his career cannot be reduced to one album's first-week performance. His argument is built around longevity. He's been around for years, has released major projects, built businesses, invested in property, and maintained a recognizable presence in hip-hop through multiple generations. 50 Cent sees the situation differently. For him, current numbers are useful because they give him something concrete to point at. If an album performs below expectations, he can use that result to challenge the idea that an artist is still at the same commercial level they once were. But Ross can always move the conversation somewhere else. That's what makes their arguments difficult to settle. One man says, "Look at the numbers." The other says, "Look at everything I've built." And then the mansion enters the picture. Ross's massive property became a symbol of his argument. It represented the idea that success isn't only about music anymore. If an artist can build wealth through real estate and other businesses, then a disappointing album doesn't necessarily change their financial position. But 50's alleged Airbnb claim attacked that exact symbol. It wasn't enough to say Ross had a weak album. 50 wanted people questioning the lifestyle itself. That's why the alleged rental listing created such a strong reaction online. It gave viewers an easy question to ask. If this property is being presented as evidence of extraordinary wealth, why would it allegedly appear on a platform where ordinary customers can rent luxury properties? Again, that question sounds powerful, but the answer could be completely ordinary. A wealthy owner can rent a property. A company can manage a property. A celebrity can use a property for a video. A luxury house can be rented for events or productions. None of those possibilities automatically means financial trouble. That's why the allegation needs evidence before anyone can turn it into a definitive conclusion. And according to the supplied material, that evidence wasn't publicly confirmed by either Rick Ross or Airbnb. So the mansion remains one of the biggest unanswered questions in this entire feud. But here's what makes it even more interesting. The same argument 50 used against Ross could eventually be turned back against 50. Because once you start judging another person's wealth by what appears online, your own business moves become fair game too. And Ross didn't hesitate. He brought the conversation back to 50's plans in Shreveport, Louisiana. Ross questioned the direction of 50's proposed entertainment studio project and mocked the concept images associated with it. He also questioned whether the project would actually become the kind of major development 50 had envisioned. But once again, there was a difference between criticism and proof. Concept art isn't a finished studio. A proposed development isn't automatically a completed business. And a delayed project doesn't automatically mean someone is broke. The same standards being applied to Ross had to be applied to 50. That's the strange irony of this entire feud. Both men accuse each other of presenting an image. Both men point to things that may not tell the complete story. And both men have enough history that their fans are already prepared to believe the worst about the other side. That's why every new post spreads so quickly. People aren't waiting for the facts. They're waiting for the next round. 50 posts something. Ross responds. Fans screenshot it. Commentators turn it into a headline. Then someone brings up an old interview. Suddenly, a brand new controversy is connected to something that happened years ago. And the cycle starts all over again. But beneath all the jokes is a serious business lesson. Celebrity wealth isn't always visible in the way people think it is. Someone can own a mansion and rent it out. Someone can own a private jet and still fly commercial. Someone can have millions of streams and still struggle to make a separate product successful. Someone can have a disappointing album and still have a valuable catalog. Someone can announce a major business project and still be years away from seeing it fully developed. The public usually sees the image. The business reality is much more complicated. That's why the feud between Ross and 50 keeps producing so much material. Both men understand that image is part of the business. Ross has built an identity around being the boss. 50 has built an identity around being the guy who can expose weaknesses. Put those two personalities together and every argument becomes a battle over perception. And that's exactly what happened here. Ross presented his property as part of his long-term success story. 50 attacked the property. Ross could respond by attacking 50's business plans. 50 could respond by bringing up Ross's music numbers. And suddenly the argument had no clear finish line. There was also the question of Ross's commercial performance. The supplied script points to a major drop compared with many of his earlier albums. It notes that most of the first-week equivalent units were driven by streaming rather than traditional purchases. But even those figures need context. Equivalent album units are not the same thing as physical albums sold. Streaming is converted into album equivalent measurements, which means the headline number doesn't necessarily represent the number of people who literally purchased a complete album. That distinction matters because social media often turns one number into a much simpler story. Only this many albums sold. Nobody is listening. Career over. But music consumption doesn't work that simply. An artist's revenue can come from streaming, touring, catalog sales, publishing, merchandise, licensing, partnerships, and businesses completely unrelated to the album. So even if Ross's latest project underperformed compared with his previous standards, that doesn't automatically mean his entire career has collapsed. And that is probably the strongest part of Ross's argument. A career that lasted decades cannot be erased by one weekend. At the same time, 50's argument also has some weight from a competitive perspective. If an artist is presenting himself as one of the biggest bosses in hip-hop, then disappointing numbers are naturally going to attract criticism. That's especially true when the artist has been promoting a project heavily. The bigger the expectations, the easier it becomes for rivals to frame a weak performance as a failure. And 50 Cent knows exactly how to exploit that. He doesn't have to prove Ross is finished. He only has to convince enough people to start asking whether Ross is declining. That's the power of perception. Once people start asking the question, every new detail can become supporting evidence. A weak chart position, an empty-looking concert section, a discounted ticket, a commercial flight, a rental listing, a business project that hasn't been completed. Individually, each detail may have a completely reasonable explanation. But online, they can be combined into one narrative. And that narrative can become more powerful than any individual fact. That's why this story should be approached carefully. The Airbnb claim remains the biggest example. If the listing is eventually verified and directly connected to Ross, the conversation changes. If it turns out to be unrelated, the story changes in the opposite direction. Until then, it's an allegation sitting inside a much larger rivalry. And perhaps that's exactly what makes it so effective. The two men don't actually need a definitive winner. They just need the audience to keep watching. Because every time 50 questions Ross's success, Ross gets another chance to defend his legacy. Every time Ross challenges 50's business decisions, 50 gets another opportunity to respond. And the cycle keeps both names in the conversation. That's the strange reality of a feud that has lasted for years. They may insult each other publicly, but the rivalry itself keeps generating attention. And attention is valuable. In the end, the real battle may not be about who owns a particular mansion. It may not even be about who sold more albums. It may be about who controls the narrative. Rick Ross wants the audience to see a veteran artist who survived the industry, built wealth, invested in businesses, and created a lifestyle that extends far beyond music. 50 Cent wants the audience to look closer and question whether every part of that image matches the reality behind it. The alleged Airbnb story fits perfectly into that strategy. But without independent confirmation, it remains just that, an allegation. And that's the part viewers shouldn't forget. The most viral version of a story isn't always the most complete version. Maybe 50 found something significant. Maybe Ross has a perfectly normal explanation. Maybe the property was being used as a business asset. Maybe the listing had nothing to do with him. Right now, the supplied material doesn't establish the answer. What it does establish is that 50 Cent found another opening in one of hip-hop's longest-running rivalries, and Rick Ross responded by shifting the spotlight back onto 50. So the question isn't simply whether Rick Ross really has a $100 million mansion. The bigger question is whether either man can prove that the other's definition of success is wrong. Because 50 has the numbers, Ross has the longevity. 50 has his business history. Ross has his properties and brands. And both have spent years building an image that is almost as valuable as the music itself. That's why this feud refuses to disappear. The mansion may be the latest headline, but the real battle is over credibility. Who has the stronger empire? Who has the better business moves? Who has actually built the more sustainable career? And most importantly, who will still be standing when the social media jokes finally disappear? That's the part nobody can answer with one Instagram post. Because unlike a chart position, a rental listing, or a viral accusation, real success is measured over time. And both Rick Ross and 50 Cent have already proven they know how to survive. The only question now is who gets the last word. So now the question is simple. Who do you think has the stronger argument? Is 50 Cent exposing weaknesses in Rick Ross's luxury image? Or is Ross right that one album's numbers don't erase decades of success, businesses, and investments? And what about the $100 million mansion and the alleged Airbnb listing? Until that claim is independently confirmed, it's important to separate what was actually established from what was said during the feud. But one thing is undeniable. These two know exactly how to keep hip-hop talking. Drop your take in the comments and tell us whose side you're on, 50 Cent or Rick Ross. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next major celebrity and hip-hop story. And share this video with someone who has been following the 50 Cent and Rick Ross beef, because this story may not be over yet.